Alright, I'm going to show you to do the front brakes on a first gen Honda Insight. This thing has like 280,000 miles. The brakes could be original because if you drive these things properly, you barely ever use the brakes. But the pads are pretty much done on this, and the rotors look like crap, so I bought these, zinc plated, cross-drilled, slotted rotors for cheap on eBay. They are technically 3 ounces lighter than the stock rotors, so technically this is a performance mod because I'm saving 6 ounces. Anyway, I'm going to be using CRC disc brake quiet, CRC synthetic brake caliper grease, and some brake clean, and then just some basic tools. So the other thing you're going to want to do is just open up the brake fluid reservoir. We're going to be compressing the calipers a little bit when we put new pads in, so that gives a way for the place for the brake fluid to come up. So I usually start just by spraying some penetrant on all the bolts. These are called floating calipers, so that these can kind of float on these slide pins. We're going to need to remove these, but we're also going to need to remove the caliper bracket, which is some bigger bolts on the back here, in order to take off the disc. Okay, that's kind of weird. We have a short one on the bottom and a long one on the top. Okay, so there's the caliper. I'm just gonna wedge this somehow so it stays put. Now we need to take off this caliper bracket. Looks like these are 17 millimeter. Alright, so you can see that this pad is pretty much gone. Why did I change the brakes? Well, I could hear them, and the reason you can hear them is this metal clip here. You can see this metal clip starts to hit the rotor when the pad gets worn down. That makes a vibration or a noise. That's how you know your pads are getting low. This is called an impact driver. Honda feels the need to use these stupid screws to hold the rotor on. They're really not necessary. And when they're corroded like this, they can be super annoying to get off. Alright, there's the old rotor. Pretty roached, pretty thin too. So on this caliper bracket, it seems like this is a little sticky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unscrew this slider and hopefully not destroy this boot, and put some new grease in there, and then I'm going to clean this bracket and paint it. Alright, so what you want to do before you try to put in new pads is, what you want to do is take an old piston, throw it in here, however, and then you want to take a C-clamp and compress that piston. Okay, now that piston is compressed, doesn't look too rusty. I'm going to clean this caliper and just mask it off real rough and spray it. So slotted rotors are directional. You can see these go the opposite way. So on the left side, you're going to want it to go on like this. Now you can install these screws. They're really not necessary. The wheel will hold the rotor on. I think that primarily these screws function to hold the brake assembly together in the factory when there were a bunch of sub-assemblies. You know what? I'm going to put some anti-seize on there. Alright, so I had this baking in a little oven, so the paint's already dry, which is kind of nice. Thin coats work better than the thick coat, so this is just the first coat. I'm just going to fog it on there once everything's assembled, because, again, don't care that much. Alright, so I forgot to put on these little caliper bushings or slides or whatever you want to call them, spring clips. So I threw those back on there. Now I just need to tighten this guy up. And these ones, you can really tighten the piss out of. And because I'm going to be painting the caliper quick, I'm just going to shove this on here like so. Honestly, since these calipers are aluminum, they don't have much corrosion, so I think brake clean is going to be good. So again, pretty much only going to see this part of the caliper. I don't really care about the rest of it, so. Alright, just going to let that dry and then I'll put it together in a little bit. I'm going to use some of this caliper grease. Just put a little bit on these slides here. I'm going to grab the set of pads that matches this set. Alright, you want to push that until that there's like a circular part on this pad. It needs to fit into the circle of the caliper. On this floating pin, put a little bit of grease. Alright, there you go, they're done. So next step, what you want to do is check your fluid level on your master cylinder. You might need to adjust a little, add a little more, or maybe even get rid of some if it's overflowing. But once you install new pads and rotors, you need to bed the brakes. And bedding the brakes is really important because half of your braking force comes from that molecular bond between the pad material deposited onto the rotor and the pad itself. So what that means is you need to drive about 60 to 70 miles an hour, get on the brakes pretty hard. Don't let them lock up, but don't come to a complete stop. Stop as much as you can, then accelerate as hard as you can. Repeat that process a few times until you smell like burning brakes, basically. And what that means is you've overheated these pads and they're now transferring material onto the rotor. Once you do that, you then just want to drive for quite a while until your brakes cool off, and you'll notice that you'll have a nice even layer of pad material on your rotor. So, thanks for watching. Alright, finished up. Time to go bed the brakes, but I want to talk about one other thing. Rotors don't ever warp, ever. If you ever hear anyone talking about a warped rotor, they don't know what they're talking about. They might have run out, which means that it's worn unevenly. And the way that happens is there's uneven pad deposits. You can kind of see it on this rotor here. And what happened was I came to a hard stop when these brakes were hot, and I sat there. And whenever you brake really hard and your brakes are hot and you come to a complete stop and you just sit there, that pad is transferring material unevenly onto this rotor. And over time, with more pad material here than here, it's going to wear unevenly. So I know that this is a common misconception and some of you won't believe me, but I will put a link in the video at the bottom. Carroll Smith, one of the engineers behind the GT40, he has a pretty good article about the warped rotor myth and how it's never actually happened, but it's just because, you know, some high schooler kid or whatever puts this on a lathe and he sees it, you know, not true, and he says, oh, it's warped. Well, it's not warped. What happened was you used crappy pads and you came down a hill on your brakes and sat there. So if you want to avoid any pulsation in your pedal, you either want to get really good pads that have a high max operating temperature, or you don't want to drive like that. So whenever you're on the brakes hard, just roll a little bit. Don't come to a complete stop, or you're going to get these imprints, which are all uneven pad deposits. So anyway, thanks for watching.